If you're a fan of this genre and have been consuming this type of content for some time, you've undoubtedly heard about some disappearances that are just brain-breaking because of how impossible the circumstances are. There's just no shortage of instances of people walking essentially just out of view and then seemingly disappearing off of the face of the earth. So in today's video, we're going to go over some of these impossible disappearances. As always, viewer discretion is advised. In mid-July of 1981, 14-year-old Stacey Ann Earhart, her father George, and a small group of outdoor enthusiasts were horseback riding and camping their way through some of Yosemite National Park's most rugged and scenic backcountry. Stacey and George had been looking forward to the trip for months, and they planned on making the most of the excursion by exploring, bonding, and just generally enjoying the beautiful scenery. The trip was relatively uneventful early on, but that changed on the afternoon of July 17th when Stacey decided to hike from their camping area to Sunrise Lake less than 2 miles away. George was too tired to join her, so instead an elderly man they were traveling with accompanied her about half the way before he also decided he was too tired and returned to camp. Stacey said goodbye and continued on alone, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her. Stacey Ann Earhart was born to George and Carol Earhart on September 29, 1966. She was the youngest of 4, and the family lived in Saratoga, California, a few miles southwest of San Jose, which is also conveniently just a few hours' drive from Yosemite National Park to the east. When Stacey turned 14, she and her father began planning a father-daughter trip, and they officially settled on a multi-day trip along the 49-mile High Sierra Camp Loop. This trip was the best of both worlds because it allowed them to travel through some of the park's most beautiful and remote areas, while also giving them the safety and comfort of spending each night with other travelers in a moderately developed camping area. After a normal day of riding on the afternoon of July 17, 1981, Stacey, her father, and their guide and the other travelers finally arrived at the Tuolumne Meadows camping area where they planned to get comfortable, eat a big dinner, and then turn in early. At the same time, there was still plenty of daylight left by the time they got settled in, and Stacey still had lots of energy. In this beautiful area, she just couldn't resist the lure of the nearby Sunrise Lake, which was surrounded by forests, an alpine meadow, and Mounts Florence and Clark in the background. So while everyone else was relaxing and discussing the day's trip, Stacey changed into fresh clothes, swapped her hiking boots for sandals, and grabbed her camera. She may have assumed her father would join her, but by then he was more interested in relaxing and enjoying the scenery. He suggested that Stacey change back into her boots if she planned on hiking to the lake, but then another man, 77-year-old Gerald Stewart, said that he was also up for a short walk. So he and Stacey set off down the trail a few minutes later, but after walking just a couple hundred feet, Gerald ran out of energy and decided to head back. Stacey wanted to continue on, and campers and guides actually watched as the two said goodbye to one another and then started walking in the opposite direction. While Stacey was gone, other groups arrived at the campground throughout the afternoon and into the early evening, and after a little while, when Stacey didn't come back from the lake, George and Stewart started to worry. Panic hadn't quite set in yet, but as darkness fell, George and Gerald began searching the camp and asking the newly arrived hikers if they'd seen anyone resembling Stacey. Then, when not a single person had seen any sign of her, it started to clue in that Stacey might be in some trouble. Maybe she'd gotten hurt on the trail and was still there, or maybe something worse had happened. Before long, George had told the rest of the group and a full search was launched. Thankfully, by then, there were quite a few others at the campsite who were willing to fan out and look for Stacey. When small groups began walking down the trail and toward the lake, it must have seemed like Stacey would be found pretty quickly, and then everyone would laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But then searchers scoured the trail and the lake area, blew whistles, and repeatedly shouted Stacey's name, but there was still no sign of her. According to her father, she had been carrying binoculars and wearing earrings and an ankle bracelet, but the only item that turned up was a camera lens found in a wooded area she must have passed through on her way to the lake. This initial search lasted well into the night, and soon enough, some of the searchers started to think that she might have been abducted or attacked by a wild animal. Unfortunately, no signs of a struggle were found either, which made the search even weirder. They also started to consider the possibility that she could have drowned in the lake, fallen into a hidden crevice, or panicked after realizing she was lost. If she had panicked, she might have made the all-too-common mistake of trying to hike her way to safety instead of staying where she was and letting rescuers find her. Then, in her panic, she could have gotten much more lost than she otherwise would have. Whatever the case, it was a long night for her father. The following morning, the National Park Service joined the search, and everyone was hopeful that with all their expertise, Stacey would be found in no time. Over the next few days, nearly 150 searchers converged on the area, about half of which were Mountain Rescue Association volunteers who collectively had decades of experience tracking people down who'd gone missing in wilderness areas. Scent dogs and helicopters were eventually called in too, but even though they went over a 5-square-mile area around the campground and Sunrise Lake, nothing new was ever found. The case was so perplexing that one volunteer apparently said that it seemed like Stacey had just disappeared off the face of the earth. and as the days dragged on, everyone knew that the odds of finding her alive were becoming increasingly slim. In the meantime, the Park Service had a good idea of who was in the area since visitors and guides were required to register and obtain backcountry permits. They questioned everyone they could and displayed posters of Stacy along the trail and around the campground, but tragically, after 12 days, the search was officially called off. By mid-October, the trails were largely empty, and with the wintry weather settling in, park officials and rescuers assumed they'd find Stacy's remains the following spring after the big thaw. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case either. Investigators are often inundated by questionable tips and supposed sightings when people go missing, and Stacy's case is no exception. In fact, Park Service investigators got calls from multiple tipsters who claimed to have seen Stacy in western states like Oregon, Nevada, and Colorado. And as is often the case with these types of cases, a number of theories have arisen despite the lack of physical evidence. Maybe the most likely is that Stacy fell into a pit or crevice or got lost and hiked into a remote area of the 750,000-acre park and then tragically died of dehydration or hypothermia. Then there's also the animal attack theory. Park officials estimate that between 300 and 500 black bears live in Yosemite, but officially nobody has ever been killed or seriously injured by a bear in the park, so this theory isn't particularly likely. Officials also looked at the possibility of a mountain lion attack, because after all, mountain lions do occasionally attack humans, but if Stacy had been attacked by one or any animal for that matter, there almost certainly would have been blood, torn clothing, or signs of a struggle. And of course, the final theory is that Stacy could have been abducted or maybe even run away. Each of these theories doesn't seem particularly likely either because of how remote the area is. In any case, whatever happened to Stacy Ann Eris, she may have been within a stone's throw of the searchers in the early part of the search, which makes things even more frustrating. As a result of this, it's often asked why she hadn't responded to rescuers' shouts or whistles if she'd been in such close proximity to them. The fact is that experienced search and rescue personnel experience this phenomenon all the time. In the wilderness, unfortunately, sound rarely behaves like we think it should. In any case, adding another layer of mystery to her disappearance, David Paulides of Missing 411 fame apparently filed a number of Freedom of Information requests with the Park Service to get information on Stacy's case, but each of his requests was denied. In the Park Service's defense, they've made a PDF file available online for anyone interested in looking into the case, but the file only includes a few official documents, and otherwise, it's mostly just old Forest Service maps, grainy photographs, and newspaper clippings that don't shed any new light on the case. Stacy is the only person to have ever disappeared from the Sunrise Lake area.